And here Mark just joined us.
Good evening.
Hello.
Hi, Mark.
Yes, sir. Good evening.
From Canada.
My internet connection is unstable.
Who said that, Jeff? Okay, are we ready?
Good
Bill?
evening.
Okay, so calling the meeting to order, the Rockport Select Board for Monday, July 13th.
My internet is unstable.
We are doing this via Zoom. Please note that if you
It's showing my internet is
Chris, you want to mute yourself. If you have comments that you want to share, you can email them to the town manager or provide them remotely through the live stream of the meeting. We are all here, and the first item on the agenda is the town manager's report. Bill?
Yes, thanks, Deborah. I'm still getting caught up here, so I'll do my best to try to get
That's
this.
okay. We're having some technology issues this evening.
I am too. I need to reconnect. There we go.
Okay, so can you hear me okay?
Yes, Bill.
All right, great. So as everyone knows, the July 14th, 2020 election that was scheduled originally for June 9th is held tomorrow. The state has stepped up actually and supplied personal protective equipment for election workers, and there's gloves, face coverings, face shields to the town. They also supplied 3 plexiglass barriers to be used and cleaning and disinfecting supplies, so that's a good thing. We have the plan developed so that the Richardson room, the voters, instead of entering the front of the town office building, will be entering the one door at the Richardson room and then exiting the other door. And of course, we can only have so many voters in the room at one time. So the front entrance to the town office will be locked and closed because the 2 other clerks, deputy clerk and assistant clerk, will be helping with the election, as well as other staff in the town office to limit the use of ballot clerks. There's been a delay in receiving all of the parts for the LED streetlight project. It was supposed to have, installation was supposed to have started last week. We're having an issue getting the smart controllers. And so at this point, looks like the end of July, and the delay is basically because of the pandemic. I had a meeting, the EMS evaluation project kickoff meeting was held on July 6th with the consultant Kevin McGinnis, as well as the Camden Town Manager, Tom Judge from Lifelight of Maine, and 3 representatives from Penn Bay Medical Center. So select board members, part of that meeting, select board members can be expected to be contacted to be interviewed by the consultant coming up shortly, I would think. And then I also provided another list of other people that I suggested that he should interview, as did the Camden manager and the Penn Bay officials as well.
Bill, what kind of information are they looking for from us?
You know, they're going to be asking you your opinions of Northeast, what you know about EMS, all of that sort of thing, to try to get some information from board members. And obviously Mark and Deborah, being representatives to the EMS Performance Review Committee, can have some input from that perspective as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And if there's any information you have from community members or something like that along those lines as well. And they will be interviewing fire chiefs and other emergency response professionals, not just here in Rockport, but Camden, Hope, Lincolnville, Rockland, because of their mutual aid response, especially for backup for EMS. Probably Knox County Communications Center director and potentially some employees there as well. So there'll be wide-ranging group of folks that will be interviewed. And that's just one part of the project. So The West Rockport Fire Station project. So we had an initial meeting on June 25th with just the stakeholder group. We met with the architects to discuss the preliminary program list, just to get a general criteria for each space so that then they could provide some draft sketches that would then go to the full building committee at their first meeting. And the Pascal Avenue sidewalk, as you're probably aware, the sidewalk along Pascal Avenue is becoming overgrown by shrubs and trees that are impeding pedestrian traffic on the sidewalk. So I'm going to be sending out a letter to property owners along the sidewalk, advising them that Public Works will be trimming back the shrubs and trees in the near future. I haven't got some dates worked out yet, but and then allowing the property owners to trim those if they would like to do that before the town crew comes in and does that. So that letter should be going out this week to them. The parking work group will meet for the first time since the start of the pandemic on July 24th. I have prepared an annual town meeting information sheet that will be available at the polls tomorrow for the election. So people can pick that up and take a look at it. It basically just explains that the new date for the annual town meeting is August 18th, and that it's done by referendum only, and that absentee ballots will be available, and to see the town clerk for those. And I'll be sending out a press release with more information detailed in that as we get closer to the election, probably in a couple of weeks, maybe something like that. You may have noticed the Public Works Department spent several days down at the Harbor Park trimming brush and trees, mowing tall grass along the steep banks, repairing the paths that lead to Pascal Avenue and Central Street. In addition, we contracted with Bragg's Tree Care to remove trees between the harbor and Pascal Avenue. A lot of trees that were leaning or impeding progress on the paths or blocking the views from Pascal Avenue. We definitely checked with the code enforcement to make sure that we were doing it, nothing illegal. So that was taken care of.
It looks quite nice, thank you.
Yeah, really.
Good. The infrastructure projects, provide you an update on that. So on Park Street, we subcontracted out the replacement of 4 culverts on that street to Rhino Services. Those were all completed at the end of last week. There's also been extensive ditching done along the Route 17 end of Park Street. There's been some done, and it's anticipated that we're going to have to put in a couple of catch basins down on that end because we're dealing with some drainage issues down there, especially by the church. And then there's a stretch of road. It's about 60 feet long. It's going to have to be completely rebuilt before the road is paved. If you've driven on that, you'll feel it. You can see it where there's a dip that's developed. Gurney Street and Mill Street also are being ditched, and a culvert on Mill Street needs replacement. And we're going to upgrade that culvert from a 15-inch to an 18-inch to better handle the water that's up there. Mike Young has been in contact with the new Public Works Director, and Rockland has agreed to repave their portion of Gurney Street to allow for the road to be repaved without seams, because there's a small section that obviously is in Rockland, so that'll be very helpful to have the whole thing done. South Street's been ditched, and a small portion of about 200 feet by 6 feet will need to be rebuilt as well as the portion of the intersection of South Street and Beach Hill. Beach Hill has already been ditched, and driveway culverts that need to be replaced have been replaced. There's also a section of Beach Hill about 325 feet long that will need a full rebuild because the base material is poor and the road is collapsing in that stretch. We're meeting with engineers this week. Actually, it's on, I think, Wednesday or Thursday to finalize the details for Old Rockland Street and get that project out to bid. Also, I'm pleased to say that we've hired Yetta, and I'm going to murder her name. We've hired Yetta Yahoo as a full-time officer in the police department. She is originally a native of Albania, and she's coming to us from serving in the police department in Rockland. She speaks four languages, including English. English, Albanian, Italian, and French. And her first day on the job was today. So she's had the pre-service training with the Criminal Justice Academy. She will need to go to the full academy whenever they actually have a class. Criminal Justice Academy is still trying to figure out how they're going to have classes to train new officers. So I'm very excited to have her here. She fills the full-time position that's been vacant for a while. And I think she's going to be an excellent addition to the police department. Last week, the Parks and Beautification Committee met, and we talked, one of the topics was about the Glen Cove rest area. We've been having an issue with garbage down there being strewn out of the garbage cans. So we approached the Parks and Beautification Committee for a recommendation down there to have a carry-in, carry-out policy at that park. And we feel that that's probably the first thing to try before we make some modifications or buy new trash receptacles or something. We think it's either seagulls or other animals that are getting the trash out of the barrels and spreading it all over the place. Generally, we have to have somebody down there once a day to clean up, which obviously is not an efficient use of our crew. So Parks and Beautification agreed that we should try carry in, carry out down there for a while. Simply costs us a couple of signs, and we'll remove the trash cans for a while and see if that works or not. If it doesn't, then we'll have to go look at another option. Also down at Glen Cove, to help try to alleviate some of the unsavory activity at the end of that park, we are removing the picnic tables from further down in the park and putting up no parking signs, and just using that as a turnaround. So if people are going into the park, they can still turn around on the end and drive out, and the police department will be monitoring that. That's all for my report at this point.
Does anybody have questions, Doug?
Yeah, just a quick one here, Bill. This has to do with the Report It, Fix It program. And I'm bringing this up just as a private citizen, not, we've had the discussion about parks and beautification using it, but just there've been several things I've added to this over the past week, blocked drainage channels and stuff like that. And they show up okay on the map, but it doesn't look like anyone is prioritizing them. And so can you just make sure that on the public works end that they're looking at that and trying to incorporate it into their daily work agenda?
Yes, I'll make sure they are.
Thanks.
Anybody else? No. Okay, thanks, Bill. Great. So the next item is any public input on non-agenda items. Do we have any, Bill?
I do not see any at this point.
Okay, and the next item is any amendments to the agenda? Sorry about the dog barks.
I'll second that.
All the more reason we need to start doing these in person. Okay. All right, moving on to the consent agenda. There are 2 items on the consent agenda. Thank you, Hunani and Amy, for your service to the town and your continued service in other roles. And would somebody like to make a motion?
I move we accept the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Okay, call the question. Doug first.
Yes.
Denise? She says yes with her.
Yes.
Mark
Yes.
and Jeff,
Yes.
and I vote yes. Okay, the next item on the agenda, action items, is RES redevelopment committee. As you know, one of the members of the RES redevelopment committee was designated to be a Rockport Parks and Beautification representative. And so we have an indication from them that they would like to appoint Steve Smith to that position. And he would be replacing Hunani. So we need a motion on that.
I move the board approve Stephen Smith to the RES redevelopment committee as the representative for the Parks and Beautification Committee.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? All right, call the question. Doug,
Yes.
Denise,
Yes,
Mark,
Yes.
Jeff,
Yes.
and I vote yes. Okay. The next item is the West Rockport Fire Station Building Committee, and Chris is with us, I think, still.
I'm right here. Yeah.
Sorry, I have to flip to my my other screen. Okay, thanks, Chris. So would you like to say a few words about why you'd like to be on the building committee? Of course.
Well, actually, I was approached by a firefighter asking if I would like to be involved with the design and I guess, the overall building aspects to house the fire engines and maybe more.
And you're a West Rockport resident too, aren't you? Or
Yeah, pretty much my entire life
Yeah,
since 63.
that's a good long time. Okay, does anybody have any questions? The other person was Tom Cox, and I guess he's not with us tonight, right, Bill?
Yeah, he couldn't make it tonight.
Okay, but we have his application. And if anybody has any questions or of Chris or any comments with respect to Tom?
I move the board appoint Chris Kangas and Tom Cox to the West Rockport Fire Station Building Committee.
Second.
Okay, any
Does anyone
discussion?
know Tom?
Sorry?
Does anyone know Tom?
Absolutely.
Okay. You okay?
We're lucky to have both of them.
Thank you.
That's a ringing endorsement.
Yeah.
I was on the fire department for many years with Bruce Woodward, probably 20, 25 years. So I'm very much aware of the fire department and apparatus and members.
Great. Okay, any further discussion? No? So I'll call the question. Doug,
Yes.
Denise,
Yes,
Mark,
Yes.
Jeff,
Yes.
and I vote yes. Great, thank you, Chris. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you for endorsing me.
Thank you.
yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, the next item is the library landscaping project, and I will turn it over to Doug to make an announcement.
Yes, the Parks and Beautification Committee is very pleased to report that we have received a $95,000 donation from an anonymous donor to be used for completion of the landscaping around the library. This was something we had always hoped might happen, and indeed it has. This is an anonymous donation, and the only catch we need to keep in the back of our minds is this pledge was made to be effective in January of 2021. So as we get into doing some landscaping earlier this year, we're going to have to find a way to bridge any cost, but we do have the signed pledge, and I'm sure this donor is good for it. So it's very exciting.
That's wonderful, and thank you to that donor. Bill, do you want to go into the next item then?
Yes, I thought it was appropriate to have that announcement, Doug. Thank you. And certainly thank that donor as well. That's pretty amazing. So we did go out to bid, as you know, for the library landscaping project, and we ended up receiving 2 bids. The low bidder is from Rhino Services LLC from Rockport for a bid of $118,683. The Parks and Beautification Committee had a lengthy conversation about the bid overall last week, and certainly, Doug, you can, and Mark, you can weigh in on that as well. Essentially, what it came down to is that the committee feels that the plan is very, very complex, and they feel like they want to, they'd like to award the project to Rhino, recommend to the board that you award it to Rhino, but with a caveat that staff and the Parks and Beautification Committee work with the low bidder to bring the price down. The low bidder, I had a conversation with him before that meeting, and he basically thinks that there's some, you can replace some of the aspects of the project, such as instead of using the certain type of paver, that's a very expensive paver, use a different brand, if you will, that will be the same quality and the same look, but could cut the cost of the pavers by a third or a half, and still get the same type of look that you're looking for. He also thinks that the benches, for instance, that are designed in there, they're very costly as well. So he thinks if you can probably find a bench that's very similar to that, maybe from a locally sourced company, and or at least more locally the one that's spec'd in the plans, and again bring the cost down. And I know that the Parks and Beautification Committee has some thoughts about reducing the number of plantings, particularly on the Russell Avenue side in front of the terraces, that would help bring the price down as well. So, Doug, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, a few things. I think Bill has done a very good job of summarizing that. It was funny how this came about, because the bids came back and we had the low bid, and despite the amount being about what we expected, all of a sudden a lot of people on the committee started to get cold feet about the plan that we had come up with. And sort of my question was about process. How could we have spent all winter with this group developing this plan, and then at the last minute, people getting cold feet? And I think Honani said it best when I posed the question to her, and I think this is very legitimate, is that during the winter, we're all sitting around in a nice cozy room thinking about putting plants in, and it's a lot of fun and it feels good. But then as summer comes around, and each of us on the committee, Anna Remsen, myself, Hunani, people are starting to work in their own gardens. And, we suddenly think, holy cow, I mean, I can hardly keep up with my own garden. How in the world is the library going to get this done? It's just, we realize we can't do it with volunteer labor. So I think that's what gave us second thoughts about this. And as Bill noted, Rhino is very willing to kind of work with us, see what we can do to minimize not just the upfront cost, but perhaps more importantly, the ongoing maintenance charges. So that's what we're going to be focusing our attention on over the next couple of weeks. And if it pleases the board, I think our intention here, and Bill will correct me, I don't have it right in front of me, we're hoping that the board will approve this concept of not awarding the bid, but awarding the project to Rhino, with the concept that we will work with them to, again, minimize immediate costs and long-term maintenance costs.
Okay, are there questions, or would somebody like to make a motion?
Maybe just on the pavers, I know the foundation is getting bricks inscribed. Is that being coordinated with the pavers that the landscaping company will use, or?
That was the plan, the plan initially called out Teco block pavers, but the sizes were all compatible with the donation bricks that the foundation is having done. So the answer to your question is yes. If we go ahead with pavers, which I think is the direction everybody's going, they will be compatible with the foundation brick, and they'll be spaced out as we've discussed previously.
Okay.
So Denise, did you say that you wanted to make a motion?
Well, we do need a motion, is that?
Yeah.
Guess I move, let me just see if there's the form of the motion.
There's not.
I didn't put one in there, so my suggestion would be that the board award the library landscaping project to Rhino Services with the understanding that staff and planning board, Parks and Beautification Committee will work with the low bidder to reduce the cost of the project. I think that would be adequate.
To reduce the cost to?
I don't know if you want to put a cap on it, or we know we have $95,000 to work with.
Right,
so.
we can't spend any more than that. And then if we want to have any money for.
Not entirely true. We still have some room for fundraising, but that would certainly be the yeoman's part of it, get started.
Let me float a motion and see if it works. Sound good, Deborah? Okay.
Yes, go ahead, Jeff.
I'll motion that the town award the bid of the library landscaping project to Rhino Services LLC for a expense to the town not to exceed $95,000 and total project cost, any additional total project cost to be made up through donation.
What do you think of that, Doug?
Yeah, I don't have a problem with it, except it says that we're awarding the bid of $118,000 to Rhino, and I'm not sure. Do we want to commit ourselves to that?
To the project, I think you said, instead of the bid.
So that's what I would say, award the library landscaping project and take it from there.
Yeah, use the word project instead of bid. I think that would work well, Jeff.
Well, let me try it again. Let me revise it. I motion that the town award the library landscaping project to Rhino Services LLC for a town expense not to exceed $95,000 and any additional cost to be brought forth through donation.
I could second that.
Okay, Doug seconded.
And then just on discussion, I mean, we don't have the piece in it that town staff and Parks and Beautification will work with Rhino, but that's sort of implicit in how we get that price down.
Yeah, I think that's pretty implicit. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, any further discussion?
How, me, I got to ask, how are we bridging the gap between now and the end of the year?
Oh, for paying for the landscaping project itself?
Right. I mean, we can't use the 95 until after the first of the year.
Right.
So how are we bridging the gap cost-wise between now and then?
Yep. There's one of two ways, or a combination of both.
As long as there's something there, it's good. But
yeah, I mean, depending on what our cash flow is, we may be able to front the money, if you will, through the regular process of paying bills for the town. If not, then there's the option of having the bridge loan and, tapping into that somewhat. But I think that we'll be okay with cash flow, to be honest with you.
okay.
And because some of this project might not be done until next spring anyway. If you're looking at plantings and things like that, depending on what what's the best time to plant certain things along those lines. So, which is something that the Parks and Beautification Committee had talked about as well.
Good, thank you.
Okay, so we have a first and a second. So let's have a vote. Doug? Doug?
Yeah.
Denise?
Yes.
Mark?
Yes.
Jeff?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Okay, the next item on the agenda is to act on the short-term loan, which is item C. So the vote's necessary for a short-term loan. So will you go ahead and introduce that, Bill?
Sure. So recall, we just talked about this a little bit. The voters that approved the use of a short-term bridge loan as part of the library project when they voted to approve the bond funding as well. We haven't needed to use that yet, fortunately, because the cash flow of the foundation has been very good, and of course we have access to our bond money. But as we get closer to the end of the library project, the payments will speed up, if you will. So I think it makes sense for us to at least have this available to us. So we did go out to bid requesting proposals from banks, and the lowest one came in was from the First National Bank with an interest rate of 1.43%. So again, we won't use this unless we actually have to use it, obviously, so that we don't have to be paying any interest. But it's just good to have that offer. And you do see in the work, there's a required motion that is 7 items long. So I apologize for that. That's our bond counsel telling us that we have to, you have to do it that way.
Okay.
All right, who wants to tackle this?
I'll do it. I move that in addition to the $1.5 million bond issue the town of Rockport issued through the Maine Municipal Bond Bank in 2019 to fund the new library project, positive vote on Article 3 of the warrant for the November 6, 2018 special town meeting authorize the town to issue general obligation securities in the amount not to exceed $300,000 to fund the project, subject to a condition that the select board make a specific finding relating to prudence in anticipated private donations. 2, that this select board order contains the finding referenced in the condition language of Article 3 of the warrant for the November 6, 2018 special town meeting. Specifically, the select board affirmatively finds that this general obligation bond is prudent and that private donations committed to be paid over the following 3 years are sufficient to repay the general obligation bond that is the subject of Article 3. That the treasurer and chairman of the select board issued a general obligation bond or bonds on behalf of the town to First National Bank in an amount not to exceed $300,000 for the purpose of funding the project, and such issuance is ratified and authorized by this select board. 4, that the treasurer and chairman fix the dates, maturities, denominations, interest rate, place of payment, form, and other detail of said securities, including the execution, sale, and delivery of said securities against payment therefor, and such actions are ratified and authorized by this select board. 5, that the treasurer and chairman executed additional agreements as the transaction required, and such actions are ratified and authorized by this select board. That the clerk executed certifications as the transaction may have required, and such actions are ratified and authorized by this select board. 6, that the bonds were designated qualified tax exempt obligations of the town under the provisions of Section 265B3 of the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 as amended, and such designation is ratified and authorized by this select board. 7, that the treasurer and chairman of the select board executed and delivered any and all documents and certificates, and took any and all actions and took any and all actions as were necessary or convenient to carry out the full purpose and intent of this foregoing vote, and such actions are ratified and authorized by this select board.
Second.
Discussion. All right, call the question. Doug,
Yes.
Denise,
Yes.
Jeff,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
and I vote yes. Thank you, Denise, for all of that.
Ooh, thank you, bond counsel. That's a mouthful.
Just one comment there is that when we have bond issues on the ballot from now on, if we add a lot of that language in the warrant article, then the board doesn't have to go back and have this type of a motion. So that will be the goal moving forward.
Sounds like a good
This
call.
language would be in the warrant that we'd want citizens to vote on?
It wouldn't be all that language, but it would be specific language that would cover all of that.
Okay.
Okay. All right. The next item is to act on award of bond anticipation note. Bill?
Yes, so this is for the 2019 infrastructure bond that was approved last November. So the Maine Municipal Bond Bank issues municipal bonds twice a year in the spring and fall. We obviously didn't make the spring one because we didn't know what the costs were going to be for these projects. Obviously, we're working on those projects currently, as I said in the manager's report, and we're incurring some expense for that. So what I'm asking the board to do is to approve awarding a bond anticipation note in the amount of $1 million that will cover the interim costs of these projects until the funds are available from the bond bank, which will be early November. Usually October is when they issue the bonds. And so you do see we did receive two quotes, two bids from two different banks, and Androscoggin Bank came in at 1.37%, which was slightly less than the 1.43% from First National Bank.
Any questions?
Just one, just so that I'm clear. I mean, this is just basically a cash flow issue in that we're pulling together the monies here to cover our expenses and between now and the time we get our bond monies received, and that the only impact to the town would be any nominal interest, correct?
That's correct. I don't expect that we would be borrowing the $1 million, but this will pay for the paving and the culvert work that we're doing and materials and that sort of thing. And we'll only use what we need to use in order to keep our cash flow sufficient.
Yeah, so we're not making any additional commitment
No,
beyond what we've already made.
no.
And what's the bond rate? I mean, it occurs to me that if we're paying a higher percentage for the bond and we don't get the bond proceeds until November, we don't start paying interest on that bond until then, right?
Right.
So we're actually making money. I mean, we're saving money.
If the
by
bond interest rate is higher than the 1.37, yes.
And do we know what that bond interest rate is?
We won't know until they sell the bonds.
Oh, I see. Okay. But it should be I mean, it should be in the same range of cost. So
You never know, Denise. It all depends on what investors are out there that are willing to buy those bonds at what rate. So, and that's completely out of our control and in the bond bank's hands. So I would expect, with the way the economy is now, well, it's hard to say because the stock market's been doing fairly well lately. So it's hard to predict what the interest rate will be.
yeah. Okay.
Anything else? Someone like to make a motion?
I move the board award the bond anticipation note relating to the various infrastructure projects approved for financing in Article 2 of the November 2019 town vote to Androscoggin Bank.
Second.
Okay. Further discussion, Mark?
No, I just wanted to ask, do you want to include the percentage rate in there, or is that just a given?
It's a given. That's the one.
Okay. Yep.
Okay. Anything else? All right. Call the question. Doug,
Yes.
Denise,
Yes.
Jeff,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
and I vote yes. All right. Moving into discussion items, we thought in preparing the agenda that since we had a couple of other library items on this agenda, that we would also have just an overview of where we stand with respect to the timing and the financials with the library project, because we haven't done that for a while. We have all been keeping tabs of it, but we haven't, for the public's purposes, had this on the agenda for a while. And as Bill states, the project is on schedule for an October opening and is on/under budget. So Bill, would you like to walk us through any of this, or if the board would just like to skip to any questions they have, that's fine too.
Well, I think I thought it was helpful for the board, but also the general public, because obviously these are usually posted. These are on the website and posted on the different media. And I'd ask Megan, the finance director, to put together a narrative, because some people it's easier to understand the narrative versus
Yeah.
So
I think that was very helpful.
Yeah, I think she did a very good job with that. I think the only thing that I wanted to highlight really, obviously, a few things. Number one, as we've said going along through this project, the lower level is being finished in the library building, and that's thanks to a donor, a very generous donor that's making that possible. And that amount is just under $75,000 that they're coming up with. So I think that's fantastic. And they're also doing the, included in that was the furniture as well and fixtures for the lower level. So that's something that was outside of the budget that wasn't going to be completed as nicely as it is going to be when it's open. The furniture, fixtures, and equipment for the rest of the library is a little bit up in the air still, but that's being funded by donations as well. As you know, the Library Foundation officially launched their new fundraising campaign. I think it was last week, looking for $250,000 for furniture, fixtures, and equipment. We have ordered the furniture for the upstairs, including the shelving, which is a large expense. And then there are various other fixtures, lighting fixtures, things like that to go along with it. And there have been plenty of other donors as well. In the Marine room, with fabulous shelving and a table. There's just a number of them. It's too long of a list at this point to list. And at the end of the project, we'll have a complete list of things that have been donated, which will be pretty impressive, I think, for the public to see. One other thing I wanted to highlight on the spreadsheet, if you look at page, I think it's page 7. Yes, on page 7 of the spreadsheet. These are what's called the soft costs, and I think it's important to take a look at that as well. So halfway in the middle of the page under that soft cost heading is something called other unscheduled. So this is basically what is left for our contingency, if you will, for the project. So in that line, there's 81,000 and change that's left over that has not been assigned or committed to any part of the project, whether it's architects reimbursables or civil engineering, construction administration, or anything like that. So if we add in the interest that's been gained on the money that we have for the project, which has to be spent on the project, it can't be saved and used for another purpose. And then you subtract out the overages, because there are some items that do have some overage in it within the soft costs. We still have about almost $89,000 in soft costs that has not been assigned to anything. So when I say in my notes that we're on/under budget, technically we're under budget by that $89,000. As you know, and I think the public probably knows too, is that part of the contract with FI is that anything that's left over, if you will, in the budget, once the project is complete, would go to them to help pay for the parking at the library, because that's included. So I wanted to point that out. And I certainly can answer any questions about any of the financials or point anything else out that you'd like to discuss.
Well, and I would just say that these soft costs, we've said all along, we had about $100,000 or a little under $100,000 that were these soft costs that this board has been very adamant about preserving and not having anything eat into them. And we have, we've taken the position that anything that does eat into those has to be brought to our attention first, which there were a couple of overages that we did know, or at least one overage I can think of that we did know about that did reduce that. And I think that had to do with the engineering costs. But anyway, so I'm pleased that we've been able to, knock on wood, get this far in this project, preserving that amount in large part.
Bill, just a quick comment. Yes, indeed, I did find this summary from Megan very helpful. There are an awful lot of moving parts to this, and I think you did a very nice job of summarizing for us. And because there are people that are at home watching who may not have seen the whole summary or the whole report that you did, I would just like to read the summary. And this is Megan speaking, our finance director. And she says in summary, as far as I'm aware, at this point, there have been no major cost overruns for the project. And if we continue to stay on track, we should be able to complete the project within budget. And I don't have a crystal ball, but it's very reassuring to me to see where we are right now in the process.
That's a huge thank you to FI as well. I think they've
Yes.
just done a fantastic job for us.
Yes, they have. And how often does this happen? Knock on wood.
Yeah.
Government projects. Mark, were you saying something?
No, I'm just laughing. How often does it happen? Right.
We said we were going to stay within our budget, and
I
yes.
mean, I'm with you, Deb. It's not by luck this is happening. We have been micromanaging this since the beginning with some very clear insistence as to what the total cap of the project's going to be, that we're going to retain as much of the soft cost as a contingency as we can until the very end, and that any expenditures over and above have to be reviewed and approved. So it's tight controls that are keeping the project costs within budget.
Yeah. Any questions or further comments? All right. Well, this was simply a discussion item, so we can move on. And Bill, all of this, as you said, is posted on the website and available to the public.
Yes, in the packet for the select board, it's all there.
Yeah, and I would wonder if we might want to do some kind of press release at some point that maybe summarizes some of the items that are in Megan's memo, because I keep hearing people say, well, the library's over budget and stuff like that. I mean, comments like that, and they're just absolutely patently false. So I think the more we can get the word out, the better.
We certainly could put something, this up on the website with the summary and the financials right there.
Let's do a little press release, see if they'll do it. It's a good public service announcement.
It is.
Yeah.
And thank you to those on the board, Doug has been putting in yeoman's time on this project, and appreciate all the time you have invested, and Denise as well. All right, next item on the agenda is the discussion of comments received on short-term rental topic and to provide guidance existing short-term rental requirements. So the agenda contains the comments from written comments that have been received, comments from this most recent July 9th workshop that was held. We received comments, well, actually, we received sort of a transcription of the comments from the workshop just shortly before this meeting started from Diane, and I'm sure those will be made available. Denise circulated just a very short summary of those comments for us because that was seems to have been kind of overlooked, and we wanted to make sure that those September comments we were all present for, but we wanted to make sure that those were included in the overall comments. And the staff has done some work that pulls together some sample ordinances, and also a couple of us prepared a decision tool that the board could or doesn't have to use for evaluation of some of the short-term rental requirements, but it helps us kind of focus on the issues maybe and consider those that might be applicable to hosted versus non-hosted, and also consider whether or not we consider them high priorities for the town, that sort of thing. So before we get into this substantively, Bill, did you have anything more to add?
Well, I just wanted to thank Denise too for putting together that summary. We did send out the transcript, if you will, from the workshop back in September, late this afternoon. And I apologize to the board for not including that in your packets. Meant to, and I completely forgot about it for some reason. So I apologize for not having that to you so you could see those well in advance and have that as part of your information. Other than that, I think that's it for me. I think.
Okay. All right. Before we get into the substantive discussion, there's just a few things that I'd like to just mention because I didn't say anything or present anything on July 9th, but there were a few things after listening to the July 9th comments that I'd just like to go over. First off, this issue is not something that's just cropped up in the last few months or the last year. It's really been an issue that's been brewing in Rockport for some time. I know that long before I ever became a select board member, I complained to the town of Rockport about the short-term rentals that were surrounding me. I've called the police on numerous occasions because of parking issues and other issues having to do with short-term rentals. And this goes back to 6 years ago. And I know others have complained as well. Those may not show up in the 2 years worth of complaints that you that Chief Gagne had put together. But as I said, they go back much longer than that. At the recent workshop, it was suggested that the select board should provide some justification as to why we are addressing this issue. And I just want to point out to any residents who are interested that that's not how the select board works. We are the policy makers for the town, and we're elected to do that. And we can take up any issues that we think are the best interests of the town to take up. And this is just one of many. Obviously, we are not the ultimate decision makers when it comes to ordinances. We can and will recommend to the town through the polls what we believe are, if any, good ordinances and regulations, and the town will ultimately vote on those. We also, there's been some sentiment that we are taking this up because of other towns having taken it up, and so we feel that we just have to. We've got nothing else to do. Believe me, we've got a lot to do, and we're doing this for the reasons that I noted, that we received complaints, and I have received numerous complaints over the years about short-term rentals, and like a resident have my own. There are no corporate interests behind this. Again, I have never spoken to a B&B owner or a hotel owner about this, or any other lodging owner about this. And so those concerns are just simply not valid. We are in a fact gathering process, and I think the bill made this very clear during the July 9th workshop. We have had a couple of workshops. We've asked the public for input. We've asked the staff to gather together materials for us. Certain emails have gone back and forth in that process of fact gathering. I'm sure as individuals have put together our own thoughts for discussion tonight, but there have been no draft ordinances, and this is not any further down the road than what Bill has presented on July 9th. I would only suggest that we keep one thing in mind as we go forward, and that is that I feel like the comments that have been made and the discussions that have taken place have really centered around this being sort of a binary issue. Rentals are not just a binary issue. I mean, it's not just short-term rentals or long-term annual rentals. There's a market out there for 30, 60, 90-day rentals. And that's, I mean, I'm frankly renting a house for 9 weeks to someone myself right now. And I've got people clamoring to rent it for 2 months after that. And so for 60 days. And so there is that kind of market. And we just need to keep that in mind as we step through these various points in discussion, because it's not, you don't have a choice of just short-term rentals versus annual rentals in order to make money or to mitigate your costs of your home. Okay, and with that, what would the board like to do in terms of discussion here? Would you like to each make any comment about where you think you're headed? Would you like to step through the decision tool and talk about this issue by issue? So, Doug, would you like to tell us how you'd like to approach it? Not to put you on the spot.
No, well, yeah, why is it always me first?
Well, because you're next to me and you're the first one. I can mix it up a little bit, but.
Yeah. I'll make some kind of opening general statements, and then I'll be a little bit more specific. And then I'd be interested in the tool. I kind of went through it, and it took me a while to sort of try to get the hang of what was being asked. But let me just begin with some general comments. First of all, I support the concept of short-term rentals. I like that idea. And I also strongly support property owner rights. This is just something I've felt strongly about my whole adult life. The issue that we're going to run into here is the spectrum of possibilities. And so let me give you the two extremes. The one is the Mrs. Berry up on Amesbury Hill, who's trying to just pay her taxes by renting out one room. I think that's probably pretty straightforward. The other end of the spectrum, though, is going to be people or even corporations that live in another state, they vote in another state, and they spend very little time in our town, really, if any. So having shown those two extremes, I think the devil is going to be in the details. I guess if you had to ask me to get into the details a little bit further, I am leaning towards something that makes a distinction between hosted and unhosted rentals, and looking at the concept of duration, a definition of that. Excuse me, I think the Freeport regulation seemed to do a fairly, in my opinion, reasonable job, and sort of the ones that I found that I perhaps agreed with the most. So that's my 2 cents worth up front.
Great. Okay. Denise, you mind going next?
You want to go next? Oh, no, I don't mind going. Yeah, I mean, there's, I think, an obvious sort of tension, whether it's the unhosted hosted or the full-time year-long resident versus the part-time resident. You know, those kinds of, between the comments we heard, there are these extremes. And I think I sort of come down on the side of, as myself a full-time resident, on the side of the people who live here year round and came here and chose to build their lives in this community because there is a community year round. And they are very concerned. I think Betsy Elwin's letter and others I've talked to are very concerned about the sort of increasing number of short-term rentals, and that could have the potential to sort of hollow out our community, where we no longer, it's no longer a place that you want to be in the winter because all the houses on your street are empty. You know, they have great summer short-term rentals, but in the winter they're just sitting there vacant. So I am sympathetic with that and want to protect the year-round community nature of Rockport. And I think we've already seen some inroads in that, but that's something I think that I am in favor of protecting. I also thought the Freeport ordinance was quite clear about what it was doing, and I liked the way it balanced the hosted and unhosted. The hosted, which is for full-time residents. Those people, Marcy Casas, who spoke in September, Elizabeth Berry, Hanani and Doc Wallace, who live full-time in the community and are renting out, whether it's a carriage house or a room in their house, and are still an active part of our community. That I'm not concerned with trying to limit that kind of short-term rental, but when it comes to the unhosted and the sort of outside investors, or even people we've heard from who's had family members they've now inherited the houses, but they're for whatever reason, are at a point in their lives where they can't be here in this community and want to hang on to the house. So I do see a distinction there. I'm sort of, Freeport puts a cap on the number of unhosted short-term rentals. I'm in favor of that. I also think we should, and the Freeport ordinance also has the 7-day, it has a 7-day minimum for the unhosted. And that is appealing to me as well.
Okay, thanks. Jeff? You spoke as a resident at the July 9th workshop, but now you speak as a select board member.
Yes, I do. The feedback that we've received and the input certainly steers me toward the need and requirement to develop an ordinance for the town of Rockport with the content, some of which we've talked about, some of which we haven't. That's all I've got from a select board standpoint.
Okay, Mark?
Mark said
I think we might have lost Mark.
because he had connectivity issues, so he said he tried to send you some comments on his thoughts. I don't know what he sent you a text or if he emailed you.
Okay.
Deborah, well, he's trying to reconnect. Maybe I could just add to this. And I looked at the decision tool, and the things that were important to me as a select board member were the concerns around demographics, the concerns around neighborhood cohesion, neighborhood peace and quiet, and the health and safety aspect of this, as well as the impact on town services. I rated those all quite high, or I rated those as very high in terms of importance. Things such as, impact on the long-term rental market, those things were medium to me, and some of the others that were listed here, personal property tax, that's not what we're here to do from a an ordinance standpoint are addressed. However, it's really much to Denise's world, Denise's comments, more of a societal and community related type issue.
Yeah, Mark's not going to be able to get back in. He tried to reconnect several times, just so that you're aware.
All right, so we have, we lost Mark then. Okay, so in terms of my, my comments, similar to what I've heard so far, I make a big distinction between the hosted situations, the hosted short-term rentals versus the non-hosted ones. I would say sort of categorically that even starting with the September 2019 workshop that we had, I never have heard anybody say anything negative about the hosted situation. In the discussions that I've had where, you know, people have pulled me aside on the street or in restaurants to talk about the issue. Again, it's not the hosted ones that are a problem. You know, as Denise says, the Dock and Hunani situation, including if it's an accessory dwelling, like Dock and Hunani situation, the situation with Mrs. Berry, I have total empathy for that, for her situation. I know that that there are people who, you know, struggle with paying the taxes, which I'm going to take this opportunity to once again say 68% or whatever of those taxes come from the school, not this town and not this select board. But they struggle with paying nonetheless the taxes. And I think that the real key there is because the people are there, you know, when it comes to things like health and safety, they're living in the house. They're not going to have an unsafe place in which they live any more than I think the rest of us expect that situation. I do think that parking, a lot of the situations that we heard with the hosted, if not all of them, they seem to have parking, you know, on-site parking that was designated. I think that's very important. And as we get into these issues, I think that that's an important consideration for us to keep in mind with respect to the to both the hosted and the non-hosted. On the unhosted, I guess I make somewhat of a distinction. It's kind of interesting reading through some of the documents that were provided and also doing my own research. There are some places that make a distinction between non-hosted when the non-hosted property is 6 or 7 months out of the year the primary residence of a main resident versus the unhosted place being an investor or second home. And I think that that's a distinction that I think we want to pay attention to and pay some consideration to. I think that what's listed in the decision tool is the demographics being the, you know, the need for a database, the permitting and all of that. I think that's absolutely necessary. To me, that's an absolute no-brainer that we need to know what we have in terms of both hosted and non-hosted, and we should be issuing permits. And contrary to some of the comments that were made, this is not a big money maker for the town, for God's sake. And anything that we have to do in terms of enforcement or tracking of it, it will not be a money making opportunity, certainly for the town. What we're trying to do is to strike, I think, a proper balance, as some of you have already said, between our full-time residents and what they bought into. I know I bought into a place in a neighborhood 25 years ago thinking that it was going to be, you know, residential, not that it was going to be surrounded or to potentially be surrounded by people who I don't know that change every few days. And that I have had some experiences with that, and they've not been necessarily good experiences. When it comes to you know, I can get into a lot more detail, but I don't want to get out, you know, ahead of anybody else. And the documents that you might be looking at are just my email notes that I have prepared for my discussion tonight. Not any draft ordinances. Yeah, Bill.
I've got some comments from the live stream that I want to read and
Great.
or to talk about. So Glenn M., who I think was in the workshop, and I'm just going to read these verbatim so that you have them. So if my property is inspected, do I get a tax break as it is inspected and certified safe by the city? ? As my property has been inspected by my insurance company, rather than take money from my pocket, hand over to a city company, for no real value.
That's not, I don't think that's a question for us to answer, is it? I think it's more of a comment.
Well, yeah, and I think, you know, looking at that, I mean, I know that there was a gentleman that had posted or replied to the email that went out to everybody that was in that workshop about his company that offers inspections, safety inspections to municipalities for short-term rentals. So I want to say that I didn't solicit him to provide us with a proposal. He had sent me a proposal earlier after seeing the discussion from the September workshop from the around short-term rentals. And I've gotten 3 or 4 other unsolicited emails from companies that provide software and things like that around short-term rentals. So I don't generally respond to those, and because there's nothing for me to respond to until the town actually would have something they would have to use those services for. So the board certainly hasn't talked about doing inspections or any of the like on short-term rentals at this point. So,
and I'm not characterizing Glenn M. because I don't know his situation or not. I mean, I remember him speaking on July 9th, but let's face it. I mean, there are the situations where people are trying to pay their taxes, but there are the situations where people are making money. And, you know, there's reference. I know John Vehemen just recently sent out a letter talking about, you know, short-term rentals being 95 to 199 or something a night. I mean, go on Airbnb and VRBO. Well, it's certainly not the majority of them. There are plenty of places out there that are being rented for $325 a night. Plus they have another, you know, another rental that's another $95 a night. There are places that are being rented out for $500, for $750, for more than $1,000 a night. So some of these are very much profit-making opportunities, and I have to say I have a little concern about the suggestion that they are not taking opportunities, business opportunities away from B&Bs and hotels in the area. I don't see it that way. And so, you know, there is a competitive balance and level playing field here as well. Okay, Bill.
I wonder if we would have consensus on the board as, you know, sort of an absolute starting point that we all agree that any short-term rentals, we should have some sort of a registration database. Is that even an issue?
I agree with that.
Yeah, and that would be done through a licensing or permitting process.
Right.
I agree with that too. So good point, Doug. That's sounds like a unanimous position of the 4 of us anyway.
I have more comments.
Yeah. Go ahead. Or wait a minute, Doug. Did you have something else that you wanted to say?
Well, I'm not sure it even needs to be a part of the licensing or permitting process. I understand that it could be, and we may agree that it should be, but it could be a whole separate issue.
I'm not sure that how you do it without having it be part of a permitting process, but anyway.
I'm in favor of going to the permitting. I mean, if you're trying to do it step by step and want to start with registration and then next, do we agree on a permit? I can get to the second step pretty quickly.
Okay, so Bill, do you want to continue with the next?
Yep. So Felicia Giordano basically said definitions are needed for short-term rental, hosted and unhosted. And Glenn also agreed with that as well. And then Hunani says,
And could you stop there? So I know that in the materials that you provided us, I know that Camden has a different definition for what a short-term rental is, but most of the materials and most of the regulations out there that I've seen almost universally define less than 30 days as a short-term rental. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't do it or, whatever, but they define less than 30 days as a short-term rental. Sometimes they say 30 days or less, and you can quibble about whether, 30 days is it or not, but certainly that's what they do. I know that Felicia, it would seem like Felicia's question probably goes to the situation where she has on Warrington Street. She talked about on July 9th that she has a place next door to her. Again, I think that her situation needs to be considered by the select board or her situation and one's people like her, because I don't see the difference, for example, between her having a place next door and a person having an accessory building on their own property. On the same property. She's, in my view, Felicia sounds like a hosted situation to me. But
it's a slippery slope, though, because what happens if the place is not immediately next door,
right, or it's across the street,
or down two houses,
right,
or 3 houses, where do you draw them?
But I think
in the ordinance, you could have an appeal process or an exception process that's reviewed by the planning board, and they say, yeah, it's the same thing. If I'm living in one house and I've got 2 short-term rentals across the street from me, you go to the planning board, say, this is the deal, I'm here all the time anyway, okay.
Right.
It's
exactly. Good point, Jeff. And definitely there are permutations on this, though, that we need to look at and deal with in definitions. Okay, Bill.
so Hunani Wallace has several comments that I'm going to try to connect all together. Because as you know, on live stream, there's only so many characters that they can put together at once. So she says, clearly the workshop was a charade. Public comments against regulations have far outnumbered comments for. Then she says, the fact that there's a decision tool with board authorship tells us that the regulation matter has already been baked in.
Would you say that again? I can't hear you. Could you speak up, Bill?
Sorry. I'll start at the beginning with her comment. Clearly the workshop was a charade. Public comments against regulations have far outnumbered comments for. The fact that there is a decision tool with board authorship tells us that the regulation matter has already been baked in. If the board moves forward on short-term regulations, we will lose our considerable respect for the Rockport board. We abhor the Camdenization of Rockport. Those are basically her comments. In all of them.
So since I was one of the authors of the decision tool, let me respond to that. A decision tool is simply a decision tool. It's like a decision tree. And it was provided in the documents that we sent out to the public. It was provided in what was provided to the board on Friday in their packets, not before. And all it is a listing of issues such as tourism, cultural exchange, housing stock, and so forth. They are issues that go either way, pros and cons. And it was an opportunity to give the board some kind of sense of guidance as we step through those issues. It doesn't suggest any outcome. It says, housing stock, do you consider this a high, medium, or low importance? Does it apply to hosted? Does it apply to unhosted? It's a decision tool. That is, it's without the responses. It's just something that people use when they've got, when you've got a lot of different issues that have to be dealt with. You can sort of get this cognitive overload, as they say in decision science, which is something I actually have a background and career related to. And it is a way to provide, to break those things down to help people talk about these items. Number one. It was far from a charade because we've looked at these comments. We're sitting here talking about the Felicia situation, the this situation, the that situation. We listened to these comments in September and we're taking all these in. We're talking about Mrs. Berry. So I'm offended by somebody who I really have a lot of respect for to suggest that it was a charade.
I'm a little surprised at Hunani's comment because really nothing we've talked about really threatens her situation. So I guess we'll have to hear more from that.
Other than perhaps the requirement for a permit.
Yeah, right. But
Yeah.
So, okay, so I have some more comments. Trying to do these by author so that they stay in a stream, if you will. Glenn M asks a question, what is the value and for whom? Not sure what he's referring to there. So then he says, so hypothetically, if there is an accident, is the city also responsible as is insurance after being certified?
I don't understand some of his comments. The value question reminds me of perhaps the third question that that Hunani raised or comment that she made, which is that those who oppose short-term or those who oppose any regulation of short-term rentals far outnumber the ones who support it. And that's absolutely false. I actually went through my numbers of the people, my own comments from people that I have talked to verbally over the last couple of years, and the comments that we got in writing, you know, over this period of time. And first off, this is not a vote. The vote is going to come in November when if there's something on the ballot, and that's when we'll find out where the overwhelming support is one way or the other. The only thing that you can say right now is that among those people who have short-term rental properties and rent them out, yes, there's overwhelming support because they've got a financial interest. And that's not a criticism, but it's not surprising that the people who do it and who make some money at it, which is not a crime, the people who make some money at it want to continue to do so. I mean, that's not a surprise, but to call that overwhelming support of the town is just patently wrong.
Or would as soon not be regulated.
Right.
yeah, I think that's all very true, Deborah. I spent a little bit of time thinking about that today, and I suspect there are a lot of people that live in various locations in town, you know, who frankly really don't care too much about this issue. But on the other hand, if this started to be a problem in their neighborhood, then I clearly think they would want to have a say one way or the other in it. So I think it's terribly important that people understand this isn't something that the select board is going to do by fiat. This will be thoughtfully developed and put out to the voters. And I think we as a select board would be foolish to spend any time encouraging the ordinance review committee to put together an ordinance that we think is going to be defeated by the voters. So there's a lot that has to be done going forward. And ultimately, it is going to be a choice of the people of Rockport. And that's the way it works in a democracy.
Yep.
Okay, I have another comment from Felicia Giordano, or several of them. So I'm going to try to read those in order. I think this goes back to when you were talking about permitting or licensing or something along those lines. To what end is database needed? Exactly what purpose does it fulfill? And then she goes on and says, I was surprised by all of the short-term rentals in the town proper on Pleasant Street. I believe that considerations are needed by the neighborhood. Warrenton has all off-street parking. House on the corner may or not have tenants. I don't know. 2 homes are owned by Cladar Hotel. Across from me, hosted short-term rental. Next to that, hotel-owned short-term rental, all empty for the winter. Next to my short-term rental is another short-term rental. Next to that, an out-of-state owned and also dark. My whole neighborhood is totally dark in the winter, and a lot is because of hotel-owned homes. Long-term rental next to me, I have no idea what goes on there, but the property is maintained, and frankly, it's none of my business. So those are her comments.
Yeah, I recognize on Warrington Street, there are a lot of short-term rentals there and I understand what she's saying. And then, there's other issues that we will obviously have to get into, but if you're, if you have, there are some short-term rentals that are listed in, there's a blueberry farm or something, out in the rural area of Rockport. And does that affect anybody? Does it affect any neighbors? I don't know. My guess is probably not. And so, where the short-term rentals are located may certainly have an impact on anything we do.
And then Glenn also says, so hypothetically, if there is an accident, is the city also responsible, as is insurance after being certified? And again, I think I can answer that by just saying that nothing's been decided about that, of course. So, and I can say that from my experience, no, the city wouldn't be responsible for or liable for any issues there. So, Punani did respond and say, we aren't just looking out for ourselves. And then we have a new comment from Marcia Steinglass. She says, so it has already been decided by the select board that this issue will be voted on by Rockport residents this fall. Is this correct?
I would say that we are having our first discussion of what our own views are as select board people here tonight, and you're seeing it, coalesce or develop live. Whether or not, frankly, the detail that we heard at the workshops, I guess I'm the one that has been saying that this issue has been hanging around too long and that we should be, on track for a vote in November. I will say that, we still want to push for that, but I'm beginning to wonder if we're going to make that deadline or not. So I certainly the timeline that we have set up is for a November vote, but it depends on how this develops.
Deborah, Mark sent me a text saying he had sent some emails with his opinion. Do we have those anywhere?
I think that, when you said that, I think that he sent me an email saying I may not have the, let me look. I may not have, the bandwidth to do this. And I think he gave me a couple sentences about his thoughts, but let me see if I can find that. It was in the last day or so.
And I guess in terms of timing, I mean, we will have to see what we can do and what deadlines we can meet. I mean, I'm concerned that if we are going to, impose some more restrictions on unhosted, that people know that before they, continue investing in new properties. I think that, this is becoming a bigger and bigger issue. Basically, any small home, maybe even large home, but small homes particularly, and you see this on Pleasant Street, that goes up for sale, it seems almost inevitable that it's an investor who buys it, fixes it up, and turns it into a short-term rental. So it's the sooner we can, I think, at least as a select board, discuss this and then put it to the voters. I think there's a lot of interest in getting this worked out sooner rather than later, if that's possible.
Yeah, I agree with that. Okay, so Mark said, because of service issues here on the island, I'll say for you to share with the board regarding STR, I'd rather not discourage people from making more money. Having said that, safety issues surrounding the rental should be paramount and addressed by us through some form of town oversight with a small yearly fee, basically to cover fire chiefs, code officers, checking the property, my 2 cents. There are those who truly use the extra money to make things meet and a little extra fluff to do whatever, and those who aren't. Maybe more as I look through the agenda. So.
Just to stay on topic with the timeline issue, Marcia Steinglass again said, you set up that timeline before even hearing the public input on July 10th. And I can answer that one. Anytime we have a potential issue that would go to the voters, because it's such a lengthy process that we have to go through, especially an ordinance. The board had asked me simply to put together a timeline that showed when we would have to do certain things, because if it's a November vote that would be by ballot, there's a number of factors that go into that, including the absentee ballots would have to be available 30 days before the vote, and we'd have to order them basically 3 weeks before that, and you have to have public hearings. So we just put that timeline together to show when things would have to happen if we were to put something on the November ballot. So I think that answers that pretty clearly. And so I do have some other comments here from Felicia again. She said, quite frankly, Warrenton is a fantastic neighborhood. All of us watch out for each other's homes and goings on. Short-term rentals are being made as neighborhood breakers. We are not. We are part of the community. My short-term rental was a foreclosed property that I was forced to look at for years. Request to the town when the grass was waist high and their building caving in fell on deaf ears. So it's more of comments from her, not any questions. Glenn asks again, does the city accept responsibility after certification? Then again, explain the value.
What does he mean by value?
I'm not sure.
Explain the value of regulation. I mean, explaining the value of regulation is quite clear. There are people who feel that their neighborhoods are changing. There are people who feel that they have bought into residential areas that are becoming more like business districts. I think that there are a number of people who have, like him, submitted legitimate comments that just happen to disagree with him. But that doesn't mean that there aren't legitimate comments and concerns on the other side. You have other comments?
Yeah, and I'm not in any position to answer that question. I mean,
that's all for comments currently.
Okay. So in terms of where to go from here, I think that there's the issue of a database that all four of us seem to believe is necessary. In terms of permitting, it seems that some believe that might be necessary and others don't. I think I definitely heard permitting from Jeff and Denise, and I certainly believe in the permitting process. I think, Doug, you're the one that suggested that might not be necessary.
I just need to think about it a little bit more. This probably just adds more fuel to a fire, but again, if you look at the Second Amendment, there are a lot of people that support the Second Amendment, but also believe in registration of firearms. And, I happen to fall into that category. So that's different. Registration is different than permitting. But I'm open to the discussion.
I do have one other comment that's come in, if you don't mind.
Okay.
From Dominic Cordisco. He says, I appreciate the board members' thoughts and comments on STRs. I would like to see the draft that the board may develop, and if you wish to form a committee on this topic, I would not mind assisting. And then Lisa Cousins-Kowinski asks, would there be a limited number of short-term rentals that would be allowed?
I don't know. We're trying to have that discussion, so I don't know. We really mean what we say here, that we have not, we're in the process of trying to form a policy view on this. And even though we keep being accused of having already done it, we haven't. So that's what we're attempting to do now.
Yeah, I want to develop that a little bit further because I agree with you, Deborah. There seems to be a cadre of people that somehow think that the Rockport Select Board, dreamed us all up on their own and is charging forward with it. But I think anybody who follows local government, both in the Mid-Coast in the state and nationally know that the issue of short-term rentals is a major issue for various governments. And I would turn this around and say that if the select board didn't at least bring it up for discussion, you could say we were being delinquent in our responsibility. To get into the more specifics of it, perhaps you can tell me, I mean, is this something that we kick over to the Ordinance Review Committee to begin to draft it, or what is the process?
I don't think so, because I think that the Ordinance Review Committee doesn't make policy. They have these discussions at the Ordinance Review Committee level. They don't make policy. They take policy direction from the board. So
right, but the board doesn't write ordinances either.
No. So, but what we need to do is we need to give them, I think, a clear understanding of the policy that we would like to see them pursue in drafting ordinances. But they can't just come up with, how do they come up with an ordinance? I mean, I've drafted tons of ordinances and laws over my 40-year career, and you can't just come up with a statute if you don't know what the policymakers want you to draft. That's what we're trying to figure out. The drafting part is easy. Well, more or less. Easy.
Once we have the guidance, once we know.
Once we have the guidance, right.
Yeah.
Well, to get back to my earlier comment, I think then that our policy to the Ordinance Review Committee is going to have to be something that we think that the majority of Rockport voters will support. And I think that sometimes that gets lost in the discussion because there may be 30 people that disagree with us, but again, that doesn't say what will happen when it goes to a townwide vote.
Okay, so we've talked about database permitting, registration. I mean, that at least gives drafters something to start with. On the hosted, I think that the sense that I have is that people feel pretty strongly about a distinction between hosted and non-hosted. And correct me if I'm wrong. But with respect to hosted, it would seem that there's I'm going to go out on a limb here and say there's probably no appetite to limiting the number. I'm making notes at the same time. The number or frequency of hosted rentals.
I think that makes sense. And again, that was one of the things I found attractive in Freeport, and again, it gets back to my comment that I support short-term rentals, and I also feel property owners have some rights. But so, if you're a hosted unit and the person lives there, you're right. I don't think we should be limiting that sort of situation.
And that tends to be sort of combined with being a full-time Maine resident.
I think we ought to maybe just back up a couple levels, because I'm concerned that we're going from the big picture right into the micro details of what the provisions of any such ordinance or permitting process might be. Because there are a ton of those. We should first decide as a select board, do we believe that an ordinance should be developed that manages short-term rentals in Rockport?
Okay, if you want to back up there.
And then get past that. And if we do, then we say, okay, what's the next step? If it comes to the point where in step 4 or 5, the select board needs to provide guidance to the ordinance drafters, then we can come up with a process for doing that. But I'm just concerned that we're going from the big picture right to the details here. And taking the shotgun approach to this could get messy.
Okay, I don't think it's a shotgun approach, but I hear your concern. But I assume that the answer to the first question of developing an ordinance, that we've really already by implication had already agreed with that by saying that we were looking at a database or permitting a registration, so that would require an ordinance. So is there anybody who disagrees that there should be some kind of ordinance developed?
No.
Okay, so we're in agreement on the ordinance. The definition of short-term rental, if you want to address that next, maybe we should, in there backing up, that we should do that. As I said, I think that Camden says anything less than 7 days is short-term rental. Almost everything that I have seen universally considers it to be less than 30 days or less than 30 days.
So Deborah, so just so I understand the process, what we're trying to do is provide some level of guidance and structure to those going forward that are going to write this.
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's what the agenda says we're going to do tonight, is provide
Right.
guidance, drafting short-term rental requirements.
Well, let me ask Denise, you're the liaison to the Ordinance Review Committee. So, you know, you take our recommendations to them and plop it on the desk, and they say, well, we think 5 days is short term, or we think 10 days is short term. What, you know, how would that work?
Well, I mean, it depends on what guidance we've given them. I mean,
Yeah.
That's why we're trying to talk about it. I think the more guidance we can give them, and I'm not sure, I mean, we got the Ordinance Review Committee, and then we have some, you know, Bill Napower and the staff who can help us as well.
We have numerous ordinances that were provided by the staff. Certainly, I have, a year ago, I had found this document that was very helpful called, that I provided to the staff on these issues, called it was by the Sustainable Economies Law Center, Regulating Short-Term Rentals, a guidebook for equitable policy. They define and note that most jurisdictions define short-term rentals as less than 30 days. So I think that we'd be bucking the norm if we did anything less, and I don't see any reason why we would do that.
Mhm.
Does anybody disagree with that? No.
No, I don't.
Jeff is shaking his head. And, you know, we're not trying to write the ordinance here, guys. I mean, you know, we have to give some kind of, you can't just turn this over and say, okay, well, we think that hosted is good, and we think that non-hosted needs some restrictions on it. Okay, well, what kind of restrictions? And going back to hosted. So again, I'm looking at this in terms of the big picture, and maybe I needed to back up a little further, Jeff, to make you copacetic with this. But I was assuming a couple of things. One is that we were in agreement on an ordinance. Okay, we are. Database, we agree. Permitting or some kind of registration process, we tend to support that. Hosted short-term rentals. I haven't heard any appetite in the community or among this board so far for limiting the number or frequency of hosted short-term rentals. Okay. Parking. Do we believe that, you know, that short-term rentals, either hosted or, you know, again, I'm kind of on the hosted here. I'm trying to stick with the hosted and then get to the unhosted ones. Just big, broad issues like those ones that were in the decision tool. If you guys, I'm sure, walk through the decision tool, what was your thinking with respect to parking? Do you think that there should be designated parking required for hosted short-term rentals?
Yes.
Hosted or unhosted.
Yeah.
And those are very, yeah, but those are very common to many of the other ordinances that have been looked at, or that, you know, comments that we've had is STRs provide proper parking.
Yeah, and that's even more of an issue in the, you know, in the village areas, because again, just space is limited. As we know, there's already an issue there. So I guess this is something we'd have to ask the parking committee to perhaps weigh in on. But my inclination is that if you have a STR in the village area, village zone, then you've got to have some sort of a parking arrangement.
You do, because that's overnight. I mean, that's not even just coming to a restaurant for a couple hours.
already a problem.
Yeah.
And
Yes,
that's hosted or non-hosted.
yeah.
I'm trying to stick with
But
the host.
again, yeah, from the people we've been hearing from, that doesn't seem to be, won't be a problem for them to comply.
At least
We heard from-
the hosted ones. I don't know about the non-hosted ones,
Right.
but hosted ones. And I suppose with the non-hosted ones, if we believe that that, you know, is an issue, then they have the ability to go to the planning board, just like a hotel or any other business that wants to be exempted from parking requirements.
Mhm.
But this is a business. I mean, does anybody dispute the fact that this is a business?
SDRs are a business.
Yep.
I guess that was one of the opening thoughts that I should have mentioned, Jeff, to your point. So
I don't know if I completely agree with that. Again, if you look at Mrs. Berry over on Amesbury Hill, I'm a little loath to qualify her renting out one room as a business.
okay, but think about it this way. If she rents out a room for 60 days to somebody, that's not even a short-term rental. If she's renting out a room for less than 30 days, then that's the definition of a short-term rental. Okay, so if she is renting it out to somebody for 5 days and then somebody else for another 3 days and somebody else for 15 days, then she's not doing what Mrs. Berry, I think, is actually doing. I mean, I think I had the sense from Mrs. Berry's comments at the September workshop is that she's probably renting out a room for multiple months, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. Those aren't even short-term rentals. And that's completely open for people to do because we're not trying to regulate anything that is not a short-term rental. My example that, that there's a market out there for 30, 60, 90-day rentals, especially in the summer. I mean, in the first week that I went on Zillow with my rental, I got 14 people clamoring and probably 10 of them I could have rented to for 60 days or 90 days. Those are not, we're not even talking about regulating.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I mean, again, I hate to, we probably shouldn't be using her name, but you're right. That's not her intent. And, I think she'd be happy to have a responsible tenant for 30, 60, 90, 120 days, I suspect, but I can't speak for it.
Yeah.
I have a bunch of other comments. Can I interject here and read them? Or?
Yeah, I would like to just talk about the process here, because if we were sitting in a room having this meeting and not doing this by Zoom, we would provide the opportunity for public comment, and then we would close the public comment and we would have just the comment by the board so that the board can actually get some business done. And I feel like this needs to be done now too. We're having the board discussion. We've had a lot of public comment, but if we want to have just a few more or whatever you've got, but then I think at some point we have to close that and be able to have the typical discussion of the board that we do on any item.
In particular,
Deborah,
people
I
who've
agree. But why don't we do this, Deborah, is take what comments are left and then formally close the public comment period so that we can have our discussion.
I agree. Okay, Bill, what do you have?
Okay, so we're gonna see where we left off. I've got one from Claire Tully in email. She basically says, what about the property rights of out-of-state owners? Not everyone can live in Rockport full-time or afford to carry the cost of a second home without ever generating revenue from it. Hosted or non-hosted seems to discriminate against out-of-towners. Also, one can do a great job of hosting and be responsible without being on site. Going back to my live stream here if I can, but my phone's frozen up. John Beeman asked about zoning. He did say the lady you were talking about would be a hosted short-term rental versus an unhosted, which obviously there's a distinction between the two. That's generally it. My phone has frozen up a little bit, so I'm not sure if I'm getting them all.
Okay. Okay, so we're going to close the public comment period. People have had plenty of time and they continue to have the ability to lob in comments in writing and so forth to the select board. Once we have a draft of anything that we do, they'll have more opportunity to comment. And some people commented on July 9th that they'd rather be commenting on a draft rather than just generally. So continuing with the board discussion now.
Deborah, are you looking for, just so I'm clear, are you looking for board input as to what elements may need to be included in such ordinance and details?
Yes, I am. And I was trying to do that by separating it out, taking it piece by piece, one being hosted and one being unhosted. But if you would like to, address it in a different way, I'm open to suggestions.
Well, I'm just, again, working, because I'm going from big picture to smaller details. Thinking anything that we do in terms of issuing licenses or permits as part of an ordinance, if we so choose to issue licenses or permits as part of the ordinance, that any short-term rental comply with the land use ordinance and all the provisions contained within. That neighborhood covenants on several of the neighborhoods that we have in the town be properly respected, particularly those that limit business activity in such neighborhoods, and there are several of those. We've already talked about hosted versus unhosted. I think that in an ordinance, we should include a process by which one can apply for an exception or whatever we'd like to call it that's consistent with our other ordinances, where there's a process where if there's some detail of the ordinance that wasn't specifically cited, but yet it makes sense to do, then it gets reviewed by the planning board and the planning board can approve an exception. And I think that would take care of all the things that we don't think of when we try to draft an ordinance here. We've talked about parking, that needs to be considered in the ordinance. We've talked about, to some level, the safety aspects of the short-term rentals, such as property egress and access, smoke detectors, CO2 detectors, that type of thing, I think needs to be included. We need to make sure in the short-term rental process that that part of the premise that's being rented out as a short-term rental is aligns with its intended use. So bedroom is a bedroom and a barn is not. We can talk about inspections and those types of things, whether they're needed or whether an applicant can do basically an affidavit stating that they're in compliance with the following list and make it easy. The thought of an annual fee, I think, is appropriate to handle the expenses associated with this. That's enough for now. But well, limitations to occupants are included in some of these details, right? The proof of residence is required in some of these in terms of where the renter lives. And then there's the issues around noise, fires, outdoor fires, fire pits, food prep. Those are the details that I think might best be pulled from other ordinances that maybe we take a town such as Freeport or something, use it as the base draft, and then add, subtract, edit, modify as we so thought. And then we get an ordinance draft out and it goes through the proper public comment period. It goes through the proper public review, just as we mentioned we would before, and it goes to a vote, and either the town voters want an ordinance or they don't. I mean,
yeah, no,
pretty straightforward to me.
Those are all helpful, but I think some of the things that you might have glossed over are the things that I would say that you need to back up and look at a higher level, and that is where I was trying to get. So, for example, with hosted, I was asking the question, do we have any any reason that we think that those should be limited in terms of duration, frequency, whatever. I don't think so. I've never heard people have any comments with respect to or concerns with respect to hosted. When it comes to non-hosted, if you can have unlimited number of non-hosted rentals, then what have we done to respond to the people who have brought this to us as concerns about their neighborhoods turning into businesses? I mean, we have to address the unhosted in the sense of, do we believe that they should be limited in terms of that you only have, some towns have dealt with it, as we know from looking at the materials. Some towns have dealt with it by saying you can only have a certain number of non-hosted rentals in a particular area. Other towns have dealt with it by saying that you can only have a certain number of nights out of a year that they're rented. Is there some view that the board has? Because that's a huge issue. That is really the crux of the issue, and you can't just lob that off to the
No, you can't, and it could be
direction.
It could be based on what zoning district you're in as well.
Right.
Density of.
My point earlier about the Blueberry Field. Right.
Because we are, I think, headed in the right direction. Again, I'd like to bring people's attention to the Freeport draft that was put together. This seems pretty simple, pretty straightforward. It's only 7 pages. It seems to hit a lot of the points that Jeff has brought up. And perhaps as a board, we could agree to sort of use this as a scaffolding and then sort of fill in areas that we think might be more appropriate to Rockport here. But again, I think we need to have some sort of a framework, or we'd be here all night addressing.
Sure, I agree. That's why I'm trying to tick off the major issues. I don't want us to get involved in all of the detail issues, but a major issue is any limitation that you put on unhosted rentals. And so looking at the Freeport one, are there limits that are placed on unhosted rentals?
Yeah, they've capped the number.
What is the number? What is the cap? Because I didn't really, what I saw was a cap with respect to how many properties you could have, being 1 if you were a non-resident and 3 if you were a resident. But I looked at it quickly. Maybe I missed it, Denise, but I didn't see a number of like nights or anything.
Well, it says for a hosted home stay, rental is on a temporary basis for periods of less than 30 consecutive days. And then for a non-hosted stay.
Wait, stop there though. Hosted, it just means the definition is a period of less than 30 consecutive days. So for hosted, it means you can have an unlimited number of rentals, which I think we just said was okay for hosted.
Right.
Okay, so for non-hosted.
Well, then it says it's, for at least 7 consecutive days, but less than 30. So they do.
No, but less than 30, that they're just defining what a short-term rental is. That it has, for a non-hosted, it has to be 7 to 30.
Well, it's limiting the length of stays.
Right, non-hosted can be for whatever period, as long as it's less than 30 days.
Right, so for a non-hosted, somebody has to stay at least 7 days.
Right.
No, that's what I'm saying. But do they? But you can't. But they have to stay 7 days. Okay. But on Pleasant Street, how does that help the folks on Pleasant Street? Because they can stay every day out of the summer can be a new person coming in, which is exactly what they and others are complaining about. You're not limiting the number of rentals.
I see what you're saying, Deborah, because I'm not sure. I'm not finding it. I thought Freeport had a cap. I guess it's Bar Harbor that has a cap.
I don't think they do have a cap here.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm asking this. Is that something that this board supports? because I mean, frankly, I don't support that, because what are we doing for the people who are complaining about it?
You support a cap or you don't support a cap?
I support a cap of some sort, because otherwise, what are we doing to the people who say every week they're turning over, and I've got new people here, and it's ruined the neighborhood nature of my subdivision or my neighborhood.
Right.
If we
it's better 7 days. 7 days is better. 7 days is better than every 3 days for long weekends, or 3 days during the week.
Well, yeah, sure, it's better.
Yeah, I'm in favor of a cap, at least exploring that, because I do think that's what we're trying to get at here, is limiting the number of houses in Rockport that are in the short-term rental market, and therefore for unhosted, and therefore not available for year-round residents.
But you're saying you'd like to limit it to some number, just pick a number, 60.
Yeah.
They could have a new rental every night.
Well, that's a separate question.
Yeah, it's limiting the number. The questions are limiting the number of houses that can be rented. That's one way of approaching it. That's the density. Limiting it by density is I think what I would view that.
And I don't think they have to be mutually exclusive.
Yeah, no, they don't have to be
separate issues.
Right. And then the other issue is limiting it by frequency, by duration, meaning that you can't have 3 days, but you can have 7. That's limiting it by duration. And then I think you have limiting by, and it's one or some combination, then it's limiting it by frequency. For example, you can have X number of, you can't exceed 30 days or 60 days in a calendar year. I mean, when you think about subdivisions, what subdivisions have done forever in order to address this kind of similar issue in their bylaws, and there are subdivisions here in this town that do this, they say that, of course, they don't want short-term rentals. And so they say, though, that in their bylaws, for example, I'm thinking of one in particular, you cannot rent for less than 30 days. Obviously, that's not a short-term rental. You can't, but I'm just using it as an example. You cannot rent for less than 30 days, and you can't rent more than 3 times in a calendar year. Now, I'm not saying that you take those particular numbers and apply it, but the concept being that you have an overall number of how many rentals you can have in a given year or whatever, that will get to the heart of the frequency issue.
To address the density issue, I see Denise's point, and I agree with that. My concern with this issue has been how non-hosted rentals can change the character of a town and a neighborhood. So I agree that perhaps we should limit the overall number of non-hosted rentals, because that really gets at the crux of what people are worried about, I think.
Yes.
So I could go with picking a number. I don't know how you do that. You just say, okay, as of a certain date, what do we have? We have, and you go from there.
But do you have to look at where they're at? I mean, they can't all be, say, in the village, right? Then you haven't accomplished anything.
Well, you kept more from coming in, but yeah, I mean, those are the questions.
I haven't addressed the existing concern.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be very hard to roll it back, Deborah.
Well,
I understand where you're going.
legally, it's not. Certainly, towns have done that, across the board, and they've been challenged and they've done it. But I'm politically or whatever is a different issue. So.
Yeah, I know Bar Harbor has a cap, and I'll have to look. I thought Freeport had a cap, but you're right, it doesn't. But I think there's at least one other in here that does, and it might be worth talking to the town about how they reached the number. My sense was, but that
the overall cap of the number.
Yeah, was it based on some percentage of the population? Was it essentially grandfathering in existing ones? Because one had a provision that there's X number, and then that's the cap, and then anytime an existing short-term rental goes out of, you need 2 short-term rentals to go out of business before you can bring a new one in, as if they're trying to drive down the overall number over time. So anyway, there's just different mechanisms for how you do that.
And I thought that Rockland started out with some caps like that, but then I think they changed, didn't they? They changed to, they allow hosted, but I think that if you want unhosted, you have to go to the planning board or whatever. Anyway.
Well, so that I guess we agree on a cap. We don't necessarily know the mechanism. I don't know if we all 4 agree on the cap, but I do. But the mechanism for how we determine that number maybe is still in question.
Yeah, I don't know if I do agree on a cap.
Okay.
I mean, I agree that there needs to be a limitation. If you agree with the concerns expressed by the residents who are opposed to the unhosted short-term rentals and then to the changing nature of the neighborhood, then I do think that you have to address the numbers, obviously, in some way. Whether or not a cap on the numbers of short-term rentals is or properties that can be rented is the proper way, or if you let people engage in it in the practice, but say that you're limited in terms of the number that you can do. Maybe it depends again on whether or not you're in a residential neighborhood or if you're on a blueberry farm.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I guess if you don't have a cap, then every house, unless we've set such limits that it's just not profitable to engage in it. But otherwise you end up with, you're still hollowing out the town in the off season.
Yeah.
You'll still have dark properties because really the short-term rental business is effectively a summer business.
I mean, I support the idea of some limitation. I just don't know if it's through the cap on the density or the duration of the frequency, or.
So then you're saying an unlimited number of short-term rentals, but each one can only rent for so many nights a year?
That's one option. I mean, I'm not saying that that's.
No, I know. I kind of understand if that's what you're. If that's
that would be one option. Yeah.
And then if they're limited in the number of nights, so I'd say just use Pleasant Street just as an example. So yet another house goes up for sale, a short-term rental investor buys it, and now they can only rent for 150 nights a year. Just pulling a number out of it. Right? I mean, I'm just trying to understand the concept and how it would address the sort of.
Yeah, okay, well, take this for example. An investor comes in and buys up a place on Pleasant Street, and they can only rent for 30 or 60 nights out of the year as a short-term rental. I mean, I would say 150, I don't think you're solving any problem then. But
that's what I'm trying to understand the concept. So it's a very limited number.
Yeah, but again, they would be unlimited in terms of the ability to enter into 60-day rentals or 90-day rentals. They can still rent their property. You're not taking away the ability to rent their property. You're taking away the ability to have sort of a carte blanche ability to act as a business in terms of constant rentals and turnover.
That approach though still leads to the possibility of having a lot of unoccupied houses during the winter.
It does. It does, I suppose. I mean, I don't know. I mean, when you're talking about nurses and photo workshop or furniture people, maybe they're not staying for 30 days or 60 days, but I don't know how you get around that. I don't know how you get around that, Doug, by
limiting the number of unhosted property. Because then presumably if a house comes up on the market, instead of someone buying it for an investment purpose,
Yeah,
it may be bought by somebody who plans to live here in the community.
yeah, no, that's a good point. It's a good point. Okay, well, I know we can't talk about this all night, but I think we've made some headway, and we're gonna have to have some drafting done, and then come back maybe with an outline. And I don't know that we're ready to give it to the ordinance review committee. We may put together an outline to bring back to the board for further discussion and refinement.
Okay.
I'd like to see that, yeah. And that can be done fairly shortly, I would hope.
I think so.
Before,
Again, do people sort of like the idea of using the Freeport as a model?
Well, again, I don't like using Freeport as a model because they haven't done anything to limit the non-hosted in my mind. So I don't like using it as
Well, I'm just saying as a general, we're asking Bill to go back and draw this up himself.
well, we're not,
He needs some sort of a guidepost.
I don't know. that we're-
add in something about the non-hosted. I mean, that is a gap in Freeport. I mean, they were concerned about peace and quiet in the neighborhood, not hollowing out of your year-round community.
So fill it in. I mean,
Yeah, that's another
something.
thought.
Both issues need to be addressed. It's not only just the hosted versus unhosted, but even in the hosted, the issues around neighborhoods, disturbances, covenants, all that stuff also needs to be included. I think Freeport has a good part of the detail. All we need to do is reformat some of that detail into our ordinance format as a skeleton to start working off of.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's got a lot of good detail, but I'm not sure that at the policy level in terms of the non-hosted that it's done anything that I would support.
Well, right, and there are some other gaps in it as well, but at least it gives us a starting point, as we said, and at this point, it might only be half right, but at least it's half right. Otherwise than that, we're starting at zero.
Okay. Yeah, no, I certainly agree with that. I just don't want anybody on this call to think that policy-wise that we're saying that that's the policy that we're pursuing for non-hosted.
Right.
Okay, is that good with everybody? I think Doug and Denise.
Yep.
That as well. Okay, good. Well, thanks, you guys. I know that this is tedious, but I don't know how else to go about doing it.
No, it's a big deal, and thank you to you and Bill and to get us this far.
All right, so if we can leave that for now, and we'll go on to the next item, which is the governor's order strengthening the use of face coverings. Bill, would you like to lead us on that?
Sure. So the most recent governor's order was issued July 8th, as Deborah said, an order strengthening the use of face coverings. And essentially what it does is that it does have a definition for cloth face coverings or face coverings, which is somewhat helpful. But then it also says that retail stores with over 50,000 square feet of shopping space, eating establishments, bars, tasting, lodging operations and accommodations located in several counties, including Knox, shall implement measures requiring customers to wear face coverings. Such measures may, for example, include denial of entry or service. Along with this, it also says that this order may also be enforced by any governmental department or official that regulates licenses, permits, etc. And that municipalities are authorized to enforce the use of face coverings on streets and sidewalks, in parks and other public spaces where individuals are gathering and not able to maintain at least 6 feet of physical distance from one another, and to enforce gathering limits. At this point, we haven't had any enforcement action in Rockport for anything, and obviously businesses that are listed in those categories can enforce their own requirements within their establishments. But I thought I would bring this up to the board because it's more of a policy issue if you're asking, or if you would be asking the code officer, for example, to enforce mask requirements. So I don't know where the board stands on this topic. I can say that, you know, generally our police department does remind people if they see people that are not socially distanced. For instance, down at Harbor Park, they'll remind them that, you know, they should be wearing face coverings or socially distanced and that sort of thing. They're using education versus enforcement, if you will. So I'll just throw that out there for comments, I guess.
So one of the reasons I wanted to have this on the agenda, Bill, is because I've gotten a number of complaints about what is our policy within the town office, and maybe a disagreement with our policy in the town office. I know that some people have come into the town office not wearing face masks. It's caused dissension among those who were wearing face masks. There's been some dissension about. I know that there's a plastic screen, plexiglass screen between the public and those who are behind the counter serving the public. And what is our policy with respect to those employees wearing face masks or not? So those are the kinds of things that I think are causing some concerns, and I'd like to address.
Yeah, well, the policy has been that in the town office that we are asking people to wear masks when they come in, customers, visitors. And obviously we can only have there's 3 people in the lobby just because of the spacing for 6 feet apart. There is the plexiglass shield between the customers and the employees at the front desk. I will say that effective tomorrow, well, tomorrow's kind of a strange day because the office is closed for anything but the election, but effective tomorrow, I'm going to require that employees either wear a face covering or a shield, which is part of the definitions of face covering. And I do have some shields on order because those can be more comfortable for some people to wear. So employees will need to wear those if they can't be socially distanced. So if for instance, if I leave my office, if they're in their own office space, you're okay not wearing a face covering. But if an individual comes into your office, then you'll have to wear a face covering, and that individual would also have to wear a face covering. If you are at the front counter and you get up to wait on a customer, then they'll have to be required to wear a face covering, whether it's a mask or a shield. And that should limit any potential issues that we might have.
I asked the chair of the Camden Select Board for a copy of what Camden was doing, and you've probably no doubt seen what Camden is doing just out of curiosity. And it says no one in capital letters comes into the town office without a mask. All staff must wear masks in the building. Staff may remove masks when they are at their workstations. So that sounds pretty consistent with what you've just described, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Except that no one comes into the office without a mask. That seems to be something that they're enforcing. It sounds like that's not something that we're necessarily enforcing in terms of the residents.
Yeah, well, we ask people that come in, if they don't have a mask on, we do ask them to put one on. The problem that we have in all of the governor's orders around this is that if somebody has a medical condition that they say that, you know, they have trouble with wearing a mask, they don't have to tell us that they have a medical condition because that violates other issues. So we ask if they put one on.
Camden's policy is if you have a medical condition, then you simply have to arrange an appropriate appointment instead of being in the. I'm not saying that Camden's is right or anything. I'm just as a point of information.
Yep. No, and I appreciate that. And we have offered, you know, appointments for anybody that doesn't feel comfortable coming into the office, where we would either have them go into the large Richardson room with nobody else except for one staff person that's well away from them wearing a mask, or we would assist them from their vehicle as well. So, you know, we're trying to take that on a case-by-case basis when it comes to that. And obviously we offer most of the things online that can be done: motor vehicle registrations, boat registrations. there are some things that you can't do online, such as, applying for a marriage license or something along those lines.
I think that the science clearly shows that masks reduce the spread of the coronavirus. So I don't think there's any question about that. There are going to be a small number of people, either for medical reason or perhaps for silly political reasons, that are going to not be able to do it. And I think what we have to look at is, this isn't going to be a 0% or 100%. We're never going to be able to hammer everybody into wearing a mask. I think, we shoot for 80, 85%, help flatten the curve, and I think that's probably going to be the best we can do.
I might be a little different place than Doug, imagine Doug. But there are many businesses and many, it appears to be, town offices and municipal buildings that are requiring masks upon entry. Just the zero tolerance policy. You wear your shirt, you wear your shoes, and you wear a mask.
I think Camden.
I think that, what does the sign out front say? Are we asked or are we required, Bill?
I'd have to go look at it because we put it up so long ago when we first opened. I haven't looked at it lately, so.
But I mean, if it says masks are required when we come in, then required means required. If they're asked, it's a different deal. And then we just have to decide, how. Well, I'm all for wearing masks. It just went in the town office, went in the vestibule, went in the work. I'll leave it at that.
And I understand where Jeff is coming from, and I completely agree that if you own your own restaurant, you own your own retail store, my own house, you can tell people no mask, no service. We're in a little bit different situation when you're a municipal government serving the citizens. It gets a little bit different.
We haven't denied service. We've just said if you can't wear a mask, make alternative arrangements to get your work done.
Yeah, I mean, we are talking about a public health crisis. I mean, it's a global pandemic. This isn't like just, would you like to do it or not do it? People's lives are at risk.
Phil is on this call. He is muted and he is not, but he just, okay, here he shows his face.
I was just watching from the background, so you didn't have to watch me the whole time.
So just a question, I mean, can we as a government entity say that you can't come into the lobby to do your business unless you have a mask on? And if you don't want to comply with that, you make some alternative arrangements.
Yeah, I do think you have the authority to do that, particularly under the governor's orders, and given the situation. In fact, I think you're required to do that at this point. Under the executive order, masks are required, and they're required under the DCD / Maine CDC guidance for public buildings as well, which are guidance, but they're obviously strongly encouraged for you to follow. So no, I do think so. I do think, though, as Doug said, and you said that you should and provide alternative accommodations. I think you can't just deny someone service, but you can deny them from coming in if they're not wearing a mask.
There you go.
There you have it, Bill.
Okay.
So is that, Jeff, what was that? Or you were doing a thumbs up?
I mean, to me, it's either we do it or we don't. And
I understand that there's been pushback by people in the office. We've got residents yelling at one another for somebody not having a mask on. I mean, that we just can't have it. It ought to be a clear. I mean, and we can obviously require it per Phil, and as Phil suggests, that's really the way that we should be going. Based on what he just said. And I just don't think that we should have a pretty bright line on this.
Yeah,
You agree with that, Denise?
I do.
Is there any disagreement? Okay. Anything else on this topic that anybody want to bring up? Oh, I guess there's one thing that I would like to ask since we've got Phil here. I know that the governor's order talks about sidewalks and parks and, and that kind of goes to where you can't social distance. I mean, I don't think there's any intent there, is there, Phil, to suggest that we should be requiring people to wear masks when they're walking down the street or on a sidewalk?
Yeah, that's right. I interpret it the same way, that it's when you can't socially distance.
Yeah.
And I support the current approach the town has through the police department of when officers are making observations that people are in gatherings and not practicing proper social distancing activity or wearing their mask when they should, that they do have the interjection and they make it a positive interaction as opposed to enforcement or fine/penalty/civil thing. That's putting a burden on our police force that I think would be way over the top.
Yeah, I agree with that. Okay, any other comments on this topic? I don't think so. All right, great. Okay, thanks. So with respect to future meetings, the future meetings are set forth here. Doug had made a comment right before the meeting started about how he would prefer to have meetings in person of the board and start thinking about moving in that direction. I shared with him a conversation I'd had with Bob Falciani, and they have been experimenting with moving in sort of a hybrid approach so that they can do their YouTube, which would be akin to our live stream situation, and using Zoom for any select board member who doesn't feel comfortable meeting in person, or for anybody who we need to invite, as we do now, to a meeting, who's going to be placed on a committee, or we need to hear input from on something. And along with that, I think they're looking at having people sign up to, I think maybe you can only have 10 people or something, for example. In the French room, they're talking about, having people, whatever the required number or limited number is, be able to sign up in advance to make public comment if they wish to, all socially distanced, etc. So I guess I throw it out to you once again, how we feel about at least a hybrid approach, if not a full select board in-person meeting attempt.
And by advance sign, I'm sorry, go ahead, Jeff.
Well, my question is, if we have an in-person select board meeting, will that by default then require that the public be able to attend, or can we still maintain our select board member only in person and live stream / comment everything else?
I think we don't have to have the public attend, but I think we have Phil here who can specifically answer that question for us.
I think a hybrid approach is the way that I've been seeing municipalities that have started to sort of tiptoe into opening. I think you can have that. Is that the question you were saying? Do you have to allow the public?
Jeff was, I was referring to a hybrid approach, meaning that you don't necessarily, if a select board member doesn't feel comfortable with attending, then they could still do it via Zoom, and you work that out in the live stream. But Jeff's comment in particular is, if the select board begins to meet in person, do we have to open it up to the public in person? Which I think that previous guidance we got from you was that that's not necessarily that's not necessary, but I don't want to.
I still maintain that. Obviously, the public still has to have the ability to watch everything you're doing. So you'd have to have a, broadcast and things like that. But particularly given the public health concerns, it's still reasonable to limit the number of people in a room and just provide obviously the online access. It's fine from my perspective at this point until that changes. I haven't seen guidance that it's changed yet.
Great.
So
And
Phil,
Jeff Parker room, I don't know how many people we can even have in that build. It will probably be limited pretty much to the number of select board people anyway.
yeah, so a question for Phil then would be that, so if the board were to meet in person and they were just live streaming the meeting, is that enough to meet the requirements? Would they still have to view public comments through live stream?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, well, depending on the agenda item. So if there's public comment allowed, like a public hearing or something, then yes, you would still have to have a way to allow people to comment. And I know, the way you do it is through written comments. Some people do allow people out of the waiting room to speak on these calls, but you have to allow some way to speak if there's an opportunity to speak. Sometimes there's not an opportunity to speak, as you know, and there's not always a right to speak depending on the type of meeting. But if there will be a right to speak or an opportunity to speak, then yes, you have to provide some mechanism for that.
And when you speak, you also mean in writing.
Right. I mean, yes.
Just for that.
Right.
I'm just trying to think of the technology needs that we have. I mean, currently everything is set up in the auditorium at the Opera House instead of in the Parker room, because the planning board had some in-person meetings. And so that space obviously is much larger to be able to accommodate people.
But we don't want to if we don't have to, I guess is.
Right. That's what I'm trying to, but again, I'm just thinking logistics.
Right.
If
So
the board wanted to meet in person.
So again, it sounds like, I think that it would be interesting for us to have, we don't have to do it here, but we could have an offline discussion about how I think Camden has been experimenting with some hybrid approaches in terms of how to use Zoom as well as live stream, knowing there's a 30-second delay, or simply having the ability to comment via live stream without Zoom if all 5 of us and Bill were present.
Yeah, there's different ways. I personally have not been part of a hybrid, but I'm about to be on Thursday. So I'll let you know how that goes. But some of my colleagues have been part of hybrids. And depending on the type of hearing, you may have to have multiple cameras. So for example, one of the towns had a administrative hearing, a zoning board hearing. And so my colleague actually was one of the people who were zooming in. So they had to be able to see the people speaking, at the table where the applicant and they would speak, and then also the board. So there's some things you'll have to think through if you're going to do it in public.
Yeah, and here I think we're just talking about select board meetings.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Moment. Okay. Well, is the board of the view that they're willing to start meeting if it's limited to the select board with providing comment? I'm seeing a thumbs up from Jeff and a thumbs up from Denise and Doug. Okay. So we could either start that on July 27th, or we could start it in the first meeting in August. Bill,
tell me what you want to do. Yep.
Well, I mean, if we're willing to go that way, and if there's not any impediment in terms of technology, it's already set up in the Opera House. I don't see why we don't just start on 7th.
That's good.
By August, we might be required to stay at home. But we'll still do it at 5:30, right?
Yep.
All right, great. Okay, are there any select board reports? Doug?
No, I think everything that needed to be reported was reported earlier.
Yeah.
I'll leave it at that.
Okay, Denise?
The library building committee was supposed to meet last week over a donation of a glass etching which I don't think any of us had really understood was going to be an etching of the actual library windows. And so we thanked the artist for the very generous offer of the donation, but said we really can't do that. So the library building committee ended up not meeting because we handled it ahead of time and just provided notice. And I think that's the Opera House committee met, but really nothing updated there. We're not renting out to private parties or third parties at this point.
Jeff?
The Harbor Committee will be meeting Wednesday night, not in person, but via Zoom. And the agenda items will be bylaws review and also further discussions around COVID-19 management in Harbor Park, ideas and input to the town regarding that activity. The rest of them haven't met.
Okay, and Midcoast Solid Waste has a meeting on Wednesday. I think I already mentioned that we were working on a new hauling contract that is going to, the board is working with outside counsel on a new hauling contract that will save about, I think, $70,000 a year. So something very significant. Bill has been involved with the strategic planning committee on some other issues, but probably more to report and substance at later meetings. So with that, do we have a motion to go into executive session? And note that there's 2 executive sessions here. Can we do the initial motion just to go into the first executive session, Phil, and then?
Yeah, in fact, you should do it. Yes, should do them separately. Yeah.
That would be the first purpose, which is the legal matter. Make that motion.
I move the board convene an executive session pursuant to 1 MRS section 405(6)E to discuss a legal matter.
Second.
Doug seconded. Okay, call the question. Doug?
Yeah.
Denise?
Yes.
Steph? And I agree. And Mark is not with us. Okay, with that, we're in executive.
So is the live stream then getting turned off? Is that how that works?
Yeah, let's wait a little bit for them to turn the live stream off.